Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the interim president of Burkina Faso, has become a rising figure in African politics, known for his unapologetic stance against neocolonialism and foreign interference. His speech isn't just political rhetoric, it's a reflection of the sentiment building up across many African nations. Let's break it down piece by piece so you can understand the depth, the courage, and the message that's resonating with so many. Traoré begins by declaring that Africa will no longer bow to external forces. He speaks not only for Burkina Faso, but for an entire generation of Africans who feel betrayed by decades of exploitation, poverty, and false promises. He says, "We are no longer afraid. We are no longer children who can be manipulated with aid or threats." This line is powerful. It marks a shift in tone, a refusal to accept the status quo. He's making it clear, Africa is waking up. He continues by addressing the Western presence in Africa, especially the military and economic influence of former colonial powers. Traoré does not mince words. He calls out the hypocrisy of nations that speak of democracy and human rights while supporting corrupt regimes, plundering resources, and destabilizing regions for their own benefit. He says, "Those who once chained us with physical chains now use economic and military chains, but we will break them one by one." These words echo deep historical wounds, but they also express a vision of liberation. He's not just speaking about Burkina Faso's future, but about rewriting the narrative of African independence. Next, Traoré touches on youth empowerment. He states that Africa's greatest strength is its young population, brave, educated, and unafraid. He urges young Africans to stand tall, take pride in their heritage, and protect their homeland from exploitation. In his words, the African youth must no longer be tools in other people's games. We must be the architects of our own future. This part of the speech has struck a chord across social media. Young people from Mali, Niger, Guinea, and even beyond the continent are seeing themselves in his words. They feel heard. They feel represented. Another key theme is sovereignty. Traoré emphasizes that Burkina Faso will chart its own course, economically, politically, and militarily. He mentions the need for real partnerships, not dependency. He says they welcome cooperation, but only on equal terms. He says, "We are open to the world, but not as beggars. We come as equals." This message challenges the global power dynamic that has often treated African nations as subordinates, not equals. It's a demand for respect. Then comes perhaps the boldest part of the speech, his stance on military bases and foreign troops. Traoré says that Burkina Faso will not be a playground for proxy wars. If foreign troops are not genuinely there to help, then they have no place in his country. In his words, "We do not need more bases. We need our dignity. We will defend ourselves, with or without help." This is a significant pivot. For years, many African nations have relied on foreign military presence under the justification of fighting terrorism. But Traoré flips the narrative. He argues that true security comes from unity, self-reliance, and purpose, not from outsiders with hidden agendas. The final moments of the speech are emotional. He speaks of the sacrifices made by Burkinabe soldiers, farmers, women, and children in the face of adversity. He honors those who've died defending their land, and he ends with a rallying call. We will build a new Africa, not with fear, but with courage, not with dependence, but with determination. The world must know Africa is no longer asleep. These words mark the essence of his message. It's not just about Burkina Faso. It's a continental call to rise, to unite, and to lead. So why is this speech important? Because it's not just political, it's transformational. It represents a broader awakening in Africa, an era where leaders are demanding fairness, youth are rising, and people are reclaiming ownership of their destiny. And while critics may argue about his military background or question his methods, one thing is undeniable. Ibrahim Traoré has sparked a fire of hope, resistance, and renewal. This wasn't just a speech. It was a declaration of intent. Let's rewind the clock for a moment. In 2022, very few outside of Burkina Faso had even heard of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He was a young army officer, just in his early 30s. But in a country shaken by years of political instability, terrorism, and foreign interference, it didn't take long for history to call his name. When Traoré led a coup that removed the previous transitional president Paul-Henri Damiba, many around the world were skeptical. Another coup in West Africa? Another military leader promising change? But this time something felt different. Why? Because Traoré didn't walk in with the usual military swagger or vague rhetoric. He walked in with a clear message. The people of Burkina Faso, and all of Africa, deserve leaders who are accountable, courageous, and unafraid to challenge the status quo. Let's take a moment to understand what made this young captain stand out. Firstly, he didn't seize power to enrich himself or build a cult of personality. Instead, he spoke openly about the sacrifices of soldiers on the front lines, the suffering of rural communities plagued by terrorism, and the deep betrayal by foreign allies who, despite years of military aid, had failed to bring real security. He called out international hypocrisy, not just behind closed doors but in public speeches. He asked difficult questions. Why is terrorism growing despite all the foreign bases and billions in aid? Why are African nations still treated as pawns in global power struggles? And most importantly, he put action behind his words. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso began shifting away from heavy reliance on foreign military support, and instead emphasized local defense initiatives, community involvement, and regional solidarity. He strengthened ties with neighboring Sahel countries like Mali and Niger, countries facing similar threats and undergoing similar awakenings. Together, these nations started to form a new alliance, not just against terrorism but against neo-colonialism and exploitation. This is where the Alliance of Sahel States was born, a pact built not just on mutual defense but on sovereignty and self-determination. Now, here's where the story takes a deeper turn. Traoré didn't just speak to politicians and armies. He spoke directly to the people. Through town hall meetings, public addresses, and national media, he invited citizens to participate in rebuilding the country. He empowered youth movements, promoted agricultural independence, and even encouraged intellectuals to help craft a new vision for Burkina Faso's future. And despite leading a military government, he frequently emphasized civilian leadership as the long-term goal. That's right, he's on record saying that his role is temporary, that one day he hopes to hand over power to a democratic system that truly serves the people, not foreign agendas. This level of transparency and humility is rare, not just in Africa, but globally. Of course, not everything has been perfect. His government faces enormous challenges: economic pressure, ongoing insecurity, and foreign sanctions. There are real concerns about freedom of speech and press limitations, and like any revolution, the road is bumpy. But one thing is clear: Ibrahim Traoré represents more than just a leader. He represents a shift in mindset. He's a symbol of Africa's youth standing up, refusing to be silent and demanding a new future. One not written in Paris, Washington, or Brussels, but in Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey. This is why his story matters. Because it's not just about a coup or a speech. It's about a generation saying, "Enough is enough. We will write our own destiny." In the early months of his leadership, Captain Ibrahim Traoré did something that sent shockwaves across the continent and the world. He told foreign military forces, particularly those from France, to pack up and leave. This was not just a tactical decision. It was a political earthquake. For decades, Burkina Faso, like many former French colonies, had relied on the presence of French troops under the pretext of fighting terrorism. Bases were established, agreements signed, and missions launched. Yet year after year, terrorist attacks continued, entire regions remained unsafe, and civilians lived in fear. Traoré finally asked the uncomfortable question: if foreign, Troops are here to help us, then why is the situation only getting worse? It was a question that had lingered in the hearts of millions, but few dared to ask publicly. By ordering the withdrawal of French troops, Traoré wasn't just making a military move. He was making a statement of sovereignty. He was declaring that Burkina Faso would no longer be a client state, dictated by foreign interests or manipulated through fear. This decision wasn't taken lightly. There were risks. France had long been intertwined with Burkina Faso's military, economic, and political systems. Severing ties could mean the loss of financial aid, military equipment, and diplomatic support. But Traoré stood firm. He said, "We would rather fight with honor and die with dignity than live in fear and shame under foreign control." These words rippled far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Soon after, Mali and Niger followed suit, expelling French troops, severing military deals, and reorienting their national strategies. What we were witnessing wasn't just a national shift. It was the birth of a regional realignment. Some called it anti-Western, others called it dangerous, but many across Africa called it long overdue. Here's the deeper story behind it. For years, African governments were pressured to align with global powers, accept aid, allow bases, follow policies. In exchange, they were promised security and stability, but what they received was dependency, growing insecurity, and diminished sovereignty. Traoré's decision broke that cycle. But he didn't stop there. He began fostering new alliances, turning to nations who were willing to cooperate on equal footing, countries that respected national sovereignty and didn't demand political allegiance as the price for help. He began investing in local defense, building up community-based security networks, and creating initiatives to train and equip Burkinabe forces with pride and purpose. And perhaps most importantly, he began changing the narrative within the country itself. In schools, on television, and in public forums, the message was clear. We are not weak. We are not helpless. We will defend our land, our people, and our future. What followed was remarkable. In towns once dominated by fear, local resistance groups began to form. Farmers, teachers, students, all began contributing in some way to the national defense. People stopped waiting for outside help. They started believing in themselves again. Traoré's expulsion of foreign troops did more than just free Burkina Faso from a military arrangement. It reignited national pride. It reminded people of their power. It challenged other African leaders to reconsider their own positions, and it opened the door to a conversation that had long been silenced. What does true independence really mean? Is it just a flag and an anthem, or is it the ability to make your own decisions even when they come at a cost? As the dust settled, one thing became clear. Traoré didn't just remove foreign troops, he removed the fear of being alone, and that is perhaps the most revolutionary thing of all. Burkina Faso is a country where more than 70% of the population is under the age of 30. So when Ibrahim Traoré, himself a young man in his 30s, took power, it was more than symbolic. It was personal. He wasn't just speaking to the people, he was speaking to his generation. In one of his speeches, Traoré said, "Africa's greatest wealth is not underground. It's not gold, not uranium, not oil. It's our youth. But for too long, they've been ignored, silenced, or sent away." These words struck a deep chord. For decades, young Africans have faced the same painful cycle. Finish school, find no job, dream of Europe, risk the sea, or simply stay and suffer. And for decades, politicians have offered only excuses or empty promises. But Traoré offered something different. He offered a challenge. He called on young Burkinabe to stop waiting for change and be the change, not in hashtags, not in slogans, but in action. He opened up platforms for student-led agricultural programs, youth-driven local defense units, and national dialogue forums where young people could propose real policies and be part of the rebuilding process. He didn't talk down to them. He spoke as one of them. And suddenly a wave began to rise. Young people who once felt powerless began volunteering to restore roads, build schools, and even patrol villages under threat. University students started writing about self-sufficiency instead of emigration. Local artists began painting murals of African heroes, not foreign icons. This wasn't forced patriotism. This was purpose. Traoré's leadership helped youth believe in themselves again, not as victims of colonial history, but as authors of a new African future. He said, "We are not asking our youth to be perfect. We are asking them to be present." And they responded. Even across the continent, Traoré's youth-led vision began to echo. In Ghana, Senegal, the DRC, young people began sharing his clips, quoting his words, and organizing community events inspired by his message. What's happening in Burkina Faso is not just about one man leading a nation. It's about a generation rediscovering its power. And let's be clear, this isn't about rebellion for the sake of chaos. It's about responsibility, about taking ownership of one's country, community, and future. Traoré has said multiple times, "My role is not to reign forever. It's to open the door for the next generation to walk through." Now think about that. When was the last time an African leader stood before their people and said, "I don't want to stay in power. I want to hand it over to you"? That's not weakness, that's leadership. And perhaps that's why so many young Africans today are saying, "This time feels different." Because it is. This is the story of a leader who sees youth, not as a threat, but as the answer. This is the story of a generation finally awakening. Thanks for watching. If you're part of that generation, or you believe in it, drop a comment below. What does African youth power mean to you? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because this movement is just beginning, and your voice matters.